Today, the EU has 27 member states, but with enlargement speeding up and 9 countries lined up and waiting to join, that number could easily jump to 36. And if Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland finally decide to stop flirting and actually commit, if the Brits get their act together and realize maybe, just maybe, leaving wasn't such a great idea, and if Turkey waves goodbye to Erdogan, then we're talking about a 41-member European Union. 41. A European powerhouse. One that could finally say thanks, but no thanks, to China and the US. Well, not so fast, because that also means 41 countries with the almighty veto, each one able to block things like sanctions on Russia. And it means 41 commissioners running the EU executive, one from every country, each insisting their portfolio is the most important one. And it means the EU budget, which is already tiny, gets stretched thinner and thinner, mostly paid for by the same handful of countries as always. So yeah, suddenly enlargement doesn't sound quite as exciting anymore, does it? But, and this is a very exciting but, things might actually be about to change. Because right now there's a new report that has made its way through the European Parliament that calls for reform and enlargement to happen together. And the man behind it, friend of the channel, Mr. Sandro Gozzi, from the centrist liberal group Renew Europe, former chair of the Spinelli Group and honorary president of the Union of European Federalists. He's just pushed through a major report called The Institutional Consequences of the EU Enlargement Negotiations. Yeah, it sounds like a boring piece of text, but for us nerds here at EU Made Simple, this is gold. Because this report is basically the blueprint for how the EU needs to reform. The recipe for a faster, democratic, and more powerful union. And as Mr. Gozzi says,
enlargement is essential. The continental unification is sparse in the very beginning of the European project, but reform and enlargement, governance and unification must go in parallel, hand in hand.
Reform the Union to unify Europe. And the best part is that the European Parliament has already voted in favor of it. 310 for, 277 against, 53 abstentions, and well, 80 MEPs that didn't bother to show up at all. And for those that want to know how each of the European parties voted, you can pause the video right now. So in this video, we're going to unpack the 3 biggest highlights of this groundbreaking report and give you a glimpse of what the road ahead looks like. The first part of the report is all about efficiency and decision making. And for regulars on this channel, you can probably already guess what's coming. The pesky veto. Or in other words, unanimity. Let's take the new 19th sanctions package on Russia, the one that includes tougher measures on oil imports. It's been stuck in limbo because 2 countries just won't agree. And even if one country said no, it still wouldn't pass. And this isn't rare. Good old Orban in Hungary alone has blocked EU decisions 18 times since 2011. That's twice as many as the next country on the list. The report says it's time to fix this by switching to qualified majority voting, or in short, QMV. This would mean that if 55% of member states, representing at least 65% of the EU's population, say yes, the law passes. So no more single country vetoes stalling everything. Then there's the bloated European Commission. Right now there's 1 commissioner per country, so 27 commissioners in total. And if all the other European countries join, that could become 36 or even 41. And there's simply not enough topics to go around for that many people. So, the report suggests reducing the number of commissioners while still keeping a good gender and geographical balance to make the executive actually manageable again. And then of course there's the European Parliament. Here seats are handed out through political horse trading. No fixed formula. Big countries say they deserve more seats. Small ones shout, please don't forget us. And somehow everyone ends up slightly annoyed. The report wants a permanent fair system that reflects population but still protects smaller states. Finally, some logic to all the madness. The next part of the report is all about democracy, or well, the lack of it in the EU. Fun fact, the European Parliament is the only EU institution you actually vote for. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, except it's not allowed to propose laws. Yeah, that's still the Commission's job. So the MEPs can debate laws, amend them, even reject them, but they can't say, hey, here's a great idea, let's make it a law. It's kind of like electing a chef who's not allowed to cook. They can only comment on the menu. So, To make the Union actually more democratic, especially as more MEPs join with new member states, the report calls for giving the European Parliament the right to propose laws. Basically, lawmaking power for the only part of the EU that people can actually vote for. And then, when it comes to elections, every country does it differently today. Different rules, different voting ages, and even different dates. It's called a European election, but really, it's 27 national elections happening on the same weekend. The report wants to change that, to make it a more unified European election. It even goes a step further, proposing the introduction of transnational lists. That means voters could choose candidates running on a Europe-wide list, not just national ones. So instead of only voting for German, French, Spanish, Romanian, or Greek candidates, you could vote for a team that represents all of Europe. And over time, that could lead to the rise of proper pan-European parties, competing for voters across the whole Union with a European agenda and not just within national borders. And finally, the report calls for more EU power and resources. Today, the entire EU budget, for all 27 countries, including powerhouses like Germany, France, and Italy, is actually smaller than Belgium's. Yeah, 450 million people, the world's second largest economy, running on less money than one medium-sized member state. The total is about 2 trillion euros, spread over 7 years, which kinda sounds huge, but that's only 288 billion euros a year. And from that, the EU has to fund everything. Farmers, infrastructure, research, climate action, and so on. And now imagine adding a bunch of new countries. And most of them are a lot poorer than the current ones. That money would be stretched so thin. Therefore, the report says if we're serious about enlargement, we need to fix this, and it makes 5 very clear proposals. First, we simply need a bigger budget. Right now, member states only contribute up to 1% of their GNI. That's the legal ceiling, and it's just not enough. A slightly higher limit would finally let Europe invest properly in defense, competitiveness, and its own future. Second, let the European Parliament co-decide on spending. Today, the Parliament has very little say over the EU's budget, even though it approves most of the laws and spends the money. If it helps write the rules, it should also decide where the cash goes. Third, create new own resources. Basically, new EU-level revenues, things like carbon border tax, digital levies, or even a share of corporate profits, so the Union doesn't have to go begging to national capitals for every cent. Fourth, phase in funding for new members. When countries like Ukraine or the Western Balkans join, they wouldn't get full access to cohesion or farm funds on day one. They'd build up gradually, just like Poland and Romania did in the past, giving everyone time to adjust. And fifth, link EU money to rule of law compliance. Pretty simple, really. If you undermine democracy or break the rules, you just don't get the cash. In short, if Europe wants to do more, it needs a budget that matches its ambitions. So, this is an overview of the report that the Parliament passed yesterday, and it's quite an exciting one. That being said though, the report is what the Parliament calls an own initiative report, or an INI report. That basically means it reflects Parliament's political position or recommendations on a topic, in this case, EU enlargement and institutional reform, that need to go hand in hand. But it doesn't actually trigger any legal procedure. Think of it more as a nudge to the Council and the European Commission to finally take action. This is what I think. The Commission and the Council need to finally act. 2 years ago, I made my very first video on EU reform, back when the European Parliament already voted in favor of a major plan to drastically modernize the Union through treaty change. And since then, nothing. It's been sitting with the Council, collecting dust, with the same tired excuse every single time. There are more important priorities. No, there simply aren't. Reforming the EU is a priority because it's the foundation for everything else. Defense, competitiveness, foreign policy, all of it. Think about it. A reformed EU can make faster, stronger decisions, speak with one voice, and actually project power abroad. More member states mean more geopolitical weight, and we can finally pull our neighbors into our sphere of influence, instead of watching them drift towards Moscow or Beijing. And defense? Imagine a future EU that includes Ukraine, a country with the most battle-hardened army in Europe, helping defend and protect our shared security. The Parliament has been shouting for reform for years, and the Council keeps ignoring it. Hopefully Sandro Gozzi's latest push will be the one that finally gets Brussels moving, because Europe doesn't just need reform someday, it needs it now. This video was powered by the Union of European Federalists, a pan-European organization founded in 1946 to promote a democratic and united Europe. Check them out in the description below. And to support us further, consider joining us on Patreon. Thank you to our presidents, Jan Schauke, Christian Peter, AGVD, Daniel Unite Europe, Stefan, and Kiki Loxen.